Mr. President, Madam Rapporteur.
Mr. President, Madam Rapporteur.
Mr. President, Madam Rapporteur.
Thank you to the Human Rights Council for the opportunity to present our statement in support of the groundbreaking report, Prostitution and Violence Against Women and Girls.
Feminist Legal Clinic is a community legal service based in Sydney.
The European Women's Lobby is the largest umbrella organisation, representing more than 2,000 women's organisations in Europe.
I deliver this statement on behalf of Equality Now, Brussels Call Coalition, European Network of Migrant Women, CAP International, and National Council of Women Canada.
I'm speaking on behalf of CAFA, an organization that has been fighting violence against women for the last 2 decades.
I deliver these statements on behalf of the French Coordination for the European Women's Lobby and the 200 organizations we represent.
I stand before you to highlight a report that marks a significant turning point in our fight for the abolition of prostitution and the protection of women's rights worldwide.
We applaud and thank the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, Rima Al-Salem, for this unprecedented evaluation within the United Nations of the system of prostitution as a cause and consequence of violence and discrimination against women and girls.
As abolitionist organisation, we applaud the Special Rapporteur on her outstanding work in her report.
We strongly support the report on prostitution by the Special Rapporteur and deeply appreciate her courageous efforts to fight the exploitation and mistreatment of women and girls globally.
The report on prostitution and violence against women, prepared by Special Rapporteur Rima Al-Salem, is groundbreaking.
Thank you, Special Rapporteur, for this report and all the efforts you have made, for placing women first and showing that ending violence against women is possible when international protection holds perpetrators accountable.
Representing thousands of women worldwide, including survivors, we thank the Special Rapporteur for her truthful, compassionate, based on a proper consultation report.
We would like to thank Mrs. Rima Salem and express our deepest gratitude for exposing the system of prostitution for what it is.
As feminists and migrant women engaged in the fight for social justice, we now have a very important document in hands.
This document has finally recognized what the women's movement worldwide has demanded all along.
This report recognises prostitution for what it really is, a horrendous form of violence against women and a violation of women's human rights.
Because it shows in a proper and authentic way the reality of prostitution and all the consequences they are for women, including girls.
She also raises questions around consent and how physical, social, or psychological coercion can be used in order to obtain so-called consent.
This is the first UN report ever that truthfully acknowledges the extent of violence and the traumatic experience that girls and women in prostitution are exposed to.
Facts on perpetrators of this violence and its catastrophic global dimensions.
She takes into account how pornography and artificial intelligence contribute to violence against women and girls around the globe.
The core of her report rests on many international covenants and human rights principles, but in particular on Article 5 of CEDAW, which calls on member states to eliminate the prejudices and harmful sociocultural patterns and practices of society that are based on the idea of the inferiority or the superiority of either of the sexes or on stereotyped roles for men and women.
This report offers a thorough analysis of the root causes of prostitution, such as colonialism, poverty, war and conflict, sexism, harmful stereotypes, a male demand.
In detailing the sexual, physical, economic, and psychological violence the prostitution system inflicts upon women, the Special Rapporteur concludes that prostitution is indeed a harmful sociocultural practice that discriminates against women and denies her right of access to equality, freedom from violence, the right to security, dignity, right to freedom from torture and inhumane and degrading treatment.
And most importantly, she calls for the only course of action that can protect women and girls, an abolitionist approach.
This report shows what it means to use the women-centered and survivor-centered approach.
The findings of the report echo and validate what women in prostitution have been telling us. Prostitution is violent, degrading, and humiliating, and all women want to exit if they can secure another quick and steady income to feed themselves and their families.
The report makes pivotal recommendations, which is to decriminalize those exploited in prostitution and provide them with the right support and help and exit programs that they need.
It also shows through very concrete recommendations how to hold perpetrators accountable.
It's crucial and it is needed to put the blame where it belongs, on all the perpetrators.
Women and girls are the most affected by prostitution, as they represent 90% of persons in prostitution, while 97% of so-called sex buyers are men.
New South Wales was the first jurisdiction in the world to decriminalise prostitution in 1995 and was hailed as a model of sex industry governance. But survivors of prostitution tell us a different story. Decriminalisation has seen a reduction in police brutality against women in prostitution. This has been exchanged for an increase in violence by the pimps, punters and traffickers who are no longer fearful of prosecution. Other Australian states have followed the lead set by New South Wales, and there are continued efforts to remove the remaining constraints on those engaged in exploiting women and girls as a commodity.
The sex trade sends the message that it's acceptable to objectify women.
Today is the day to take stock of the grave violations of human rights in prostitution.
Misogyny, racism, pedocriminality, incest, violence, torture. This is not the exception in pornography. It is the norm. This reality is revealed by women in France who are bravely coming forward and testifying about the horrific experiences of being raped up to 80 times in just a few hours during shoot.
We commend the Special Rapporteur for recognizing that prostitution in all its forms, including pornography, is not work, but a form of violence driven by men who purchase sexual acts and sustained by patriarchal norms.
Considering the inherent violent nature of prostitution, one cannot trivialize it with sex work vocabulary.
Pornography is neither sex nor work, neither cinema nor freedom of expression. It is a system of violence and hatred.
In a world where every third woman is assaulted, the globalized trade in women makes every woman a sexual prey.
Prostitution is a form of violence that nourishes itself from different forms of systemic inequalities based on exploitation, sex, poverty, age, ethnicity, and migration status.
The report outlines a pathway for states to address prostitution from a human rights and women's rights perspective.
It will be a strong tool into the hands of organizations in Lebanon and the Arab world to push our governments to bring justice to the victims.
It is a must read for everyone working on human rights, and it is a must for the states to learn from it and put recommendations into force.
The rapporteur is a voice of reason in a human rights landscape too often dominated by a fraudulent narrative that serves those with a vested interest in undermining women's sex-based rights.
As women human rights defenders, we know that equality is impossible when prostitution exists.
We want a society based on gender equality, respect, and dignity.
We want our laws to decriminalize women, penalize the profiteers, including those who purchase the bodies of women, and provide much-needed exit pathways for the victims.
As a survivor myself of prostitution and commercial sexual exploitation, I know that this is the right way to go.
It is time to stop reserving human rights for a privileged few.
The world in which we are treated as humans is possible.
Women's bodies are not products, and consent cannot be bought.
No liberty is absolute. The inherent dignity of the human person, the protection of all against commodification and objectification should be.
We call on member states and UN agencies to undertake the report's recommendations and recommit to upholding international law and human rights principles to protect and save the lives of women and girls globally.
We must fulfill Special Rapporteur Rima Salem's recommendations and stop protecting systems that confuse sexuality with violence and mistake domination for freedom.
Thank you, Special Rapporteur, for not giving up on women and girls in prostitution. The world betrayed them too many times. The time has come to react.